She's a failure. Honestly, watching her struggle in poverty while I thrive, it's hilarious.
You think my success is a joke?
I am happy that I have made it in life. All thanks to God for where I am today.
He mocked his ex-wife's poverty on camera, unaware the interview was about her success. He laughed into the camera, confident, comfortable, cruel. He mocked his ex-wife's poverty like it was a joke everyone should enjoy, called her a failure, a woman life had finished with. He didn't know the interview was live. He didn't know millions were watching. And he definitely didn't know who the interview was really about. Because the story wasn't about a broke woman left behind. It was about the silent rise of someone he once looked down on, a woman who rebuilt everything while he was busy talking. He thought the camera was there to celebrate him, to showcase his success, to let him rewrite history in his favor. But in that moment, every word he spoke was evidence. Every laugh sealed his fate. Now the truth is about to surface. And when it does, he won't just lose his image, he'll lose the one thing he thought he still had: control of the story. Before we continue this amazing story, please hit that subscribe button now, like this video and comment below where you are watching from, and what time it is in your country. Now let's see what happened next. The studio lights in Lekki hum softly as they warm the air, casting a golden shine across polished floors and glass walls that reflect wealth without saying a word. The man leans back in his chair, jacket open, wristwatch catching the light like it wants attention too. His laugh breaks out suddenly, easy, relaxed, rehearsed by years of getting his way. It's the kind of laugh that assumes agreement before anyone responds. Outside the studio, Lagos traffic roars like distant thunder, but inside, he feels untouchable. He doesn't notice how the camera lingers, how the lens doesn't blink, how every second is being stored forever. And that alone should have scared him. A producer signals quietly, and the red recording light clicks on, small but deadly, like a loaded chamber. He adjusts himself, confident, comfortable, already deciding how this story will be told. In his mind, this is a victory lap, a chance to polish his image, remind the world he rose above a failed marriage, a burden he claims he outgrew. His smile widens as he speaks freely, careless with words because he believes context belongs to him. Around him, the studio smells faintly of fresh coffee and money. No one interrupts him. No one warns him. And that silence is already doing damage he can't see. The laugh comes again, louder this time, sharper, slicing through the calm like broken glass. It isn't rage, it isn't bitterness. It's worse, dismissive, the kind that reduces another human being into a punchline without effort. His shoulders rise and fall with ease as he gestures, relaxed, performing confidence like muscle memory. He doesn't think of consequences because consequences have never visited him before. He believes this moment belongs to him alone. What he doesn't realize is that the room isn't reacting the way he expects, and that something has already shifted behind the cameras. Beyond the studio walls, unseen screens begin to glow. Phones light up in Lekki living rooms, in buses crawling through Third Mainland Bridge, in quiet kitchens where people half listen while doing chores. His voice travels faster than he ever could. Each word lands in places he cannot control, in ears he never considered. The laugh that made him feel powerful now echoes strangely, stripped of charm, exposed by distance. Somewhere in that growing audience, discomfort begins to stir. Someone pauses. Someone leans closer. And for the first time, the story starts slipping out of his hands. Inside the studio, he mistakes silence for approval. The host nods, the cameras keep rolling, and he keeps going, unaware that momentum can turn into a fall without warning. The lights feel warmer now, heavier, pressing against his skin. He wipes his palms lightly against his trousers, not from fear but habit. He believes control lives in confidence. He doesn't see how the frame has already tightened around him, how every word is lining up like witnesses waiting their turn. If he did, he might have stopped. But the laugh comes again, and it seals something permanent. The camera zooms slightly, slow and deliberate, catching details he's forgotten matter. His smirk, the casual shrug, the ease with which he dismisses a past he thinks is irrelevant. Lagos has taught him how to perform strength, how to talk over silence, how to win by sounding sheer. He doesn't notice the shift in energy, the way the room no longer feels like celebration but examination. The studio air grows tense, almost thick, and yet he keeps talking, convinced the worst thing that could happen is misunderstanding. Never imagining truth is already sharpening its teeth. As the laugh fades, it hangs in the air longer than it should, uncomfortable, exposed, stripped of its power. Somewhere off camera, a timeline is being rearranged. Somewhere else, a name he hasn't said yet is waiting. He still believes this interview is about his success, his version, his voice. He has no idea that this very moment, this careless laugh, is the opening scene of his undoing, and that the real story hasn't even begun to speak. Morning light crept through the Lekki apartment, pale and thin, touching surfaces that no longer felt shared. The house still looked expensive, still smelled like polish and perfume, but something essential had drained out. He moved through the space with purpose, phone glowing in his hand, footsteps sharp and impatient. She watched from the doorway as he adjusted his cuffs, already late for a life that no longer included her. No argument followed. No explanation came. Just the sound of a door closing too softly for what it ended, leaving a silence that felt louder than any fight. Evenings became exercises in absence, measured by the ticking wall clock and the hum of generators outside. She cooked meals that went cold untouched, the aroma of spices mixing with disappointment. He came home distracted, eyes scanning screens instead of faces, laughter reserved for messages she would never read. Conversations shortened into nods. Questions died halfway out of her mouth. Love didn't explode here. It thinned out slowly, like fuel leaking unnoticed. And with every quiet night, something important slipped further away, unnoticed by the man already preparing to leave. Bills began to stack neatly on the dining table, their white edges sharp with urgency. She paid what she could, rearranged priorities, stretched Nara until it felt unreal. He noticed only when convenience was threatened, an annoyance flashing across his face before disappearing again. Support turned into criticism. Patience turned into sighs. The partnership they once promised shrank into a transaction she kept losing. Still, she tried. Still, she hoped. Because walking away felt heavier than carrying everything alone, until even hope started to feel like unpaid debt. The final conversation never arrived, only its shadow. One afternoon, she returned to find wardrobes lighter, hangers swinging slightly as if confused. His scent lingered, faint and insulting like proof of something unfinished. No note explained the absence, no apology softened it, just an empty space where a future used to sit. He didn't storm out. He erased himself. And in that quiet erasure, she understood the truth. She had been left long before he physically walked away. Word traveled fast through Lekki's tight social circles, carried by security guards, salon chairs, and polite smiles. His version spread first, polished and convenient. He spoke of incompatibility, of wasted time, of a woman who couldn't keep up. Silence became her only response, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was still breathing through the shock. People mistook that quiet for guilt, for weakness, and with every retelling, the story bent further away from her reality, shaping a narrative she couldn't recognize. Nights grew heavier after that, filled with memories she hadn't agreed to revisit. The bed felt too wide, the ceiling too close. She replayed small moments, the early laughter, the promises whispered like secrets, wondering when exactly they lost their weight. Grief settled in layers, not dramatic, just persistent. Yet beneath it, something unfamiliar stirred. A slow, stubborn awareness that silence didn't mean emptiness, that being abandoned didn't mean being finished, but she wasn't ready to name that feeling yet. Somewhere across the city, he slept easily, convinced the chapter was closed and forgotten. He believed silence meant surrender, that her story had ended where his convenience began. He didn't see the quiet work happening inside her, the careful gathering of strength beneath grief. To him, she was already behind him. But what he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that silence wasn't the end of her story. It was the space where something dangerous to his confidence was quietly forming. Morning heat pressed against the streets of Lekki as she stepped outside, the sun already unforgiving, eyes everywhere. The gate creaked open, and with it came the looks. Quick scans, slow judgments, whispers dressed as concern. Her clothes were clean but no longer impressive, her walk measured, careful. Somewhere between the driveway and the road, her name began to change. It wasn't spoken aloud, but it hovered in the air, heavy and sticky. People no longer saw a woman healing. They saw a conclusion they felt entitled to announce, and it followed her like a shadow. Market stalls buzzed with noise, laughter bouncing off tin roofs, but conversations dipped when she passed. Sympathy wore thin quickly, replaced by curiosity sharpened into cruelty. A failed marriage became a public case study, dissected without consent. Every purchase was watched, every choice interpreted. Poverty wasn't just about money anymore, it became a verdict. A story people told to feel better about their own lives. And with each passing day, that label tightened, daring her to either disappear under it or do something no one expected. Social media amplified what the streets began, turning private loss into communal entertainment. Old photos resurfaced, captions rewritten by strangers who never knew the work she put in. Laughter traveled faster than truth, bouncing between phones and group chats. Her silence was screenshotted, misread as shame. People spoke with certainty about her future, predicting struggle like weather. She scrolled late at night, thumb trembling, watching herself shrink in other people's stories. What none of them realized was how carefully she was observing them back. Church pews offered no refuge, only softer judgment. Heads tilted during prayers. My hands squeezed with performative concern. Donations felt heavier now, each naira a reminder of how far she'd fallen in their eyes. Advice came uninvited, laced with superiority. Marriage seminars became mirrors of failure she hadn't asked to face. Even faith, once comforting, felt crowded with expectations she couldn't meet. Yet beneath the hymns and polite smiles, something hardened inside her, a refusal to accept the ending everyone else had already written. Family gatherings grew tense, filled with careful conversations and louder silences. Relatives measured success by visible proof, and she no longer qualified. Questions came wrapped in jokes, comparisons slipped in casually. Someone always knew a woman who handled it better. She nodded, smiled, absorbed it all. Each comment chipped away not at her spirit, but at her tolerance for being defined by others. The shame they tried to place on her didn't break her, it sharpened her awareness. And awareness, once awakened, doesn't sleep easily. Bills still arrived, relentless and unbothered by opinions. She learned new routes through the city to avoid familiar faces, discovering parts of Lagos she'd never needed before. In these quiet movements, something shifted. She noticed patterns: who watched, who talked, who underestimated. Poverty, she realized, wasn't just lack. It was a costume people forced on you so they could stop imagining your potential. And once she understood that, the label began to lose its power, even as others clung to it desperately. By the time the community decided her story was finished, she had already stopped listening. The whispers faded into background noise, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own resolve. They thought poverty had claimed her identity, sealed her fate, ended her relevance. What they couldn't see, what made their judgment dangerous, was that labels only work when the person wearing them agrees. and she had just begun planning the moment she would take it off, in a way no one would forget. Studio lights hummed to life inside a glass-walled building in Lekki, bathing the room in a flattering glow that softened edges and inflated confidence. Air conditioning kissed the skin, carrying the faint smell of polished leather and fresh makeup. He settled into his seat like a man arriving home, shoulders loose, posture open, smile already rehearsed. The camera lens adjusted, zooming gently, capturing comfort as credibility. Everything about the space said celebration. What no one announced was that the light wasn't there to flatter. It was there to reveal, and revelation never warns before it begins. Producers moved with quiet urgency behind the scenes, cables coiled neatly, tablets glowing with schedules that looked harmless on the surface. The countdown rolled silently, numbers blinking like a private joke only the camera understood. He tapped his foot, enjoying the moment before attention locked in, unaware that timing is a language fate speaks fluently. This wasn't an ambush. It was an invitation. And invitations are dangerous because people lower their guard willingly, stepping into rooms they assume were built for them, not realizing the walls were listening. The host's presence felt warm without being intimate, professional without being distant, like a balance that encouraged honesty without demanding it. The questions that followed sounded easy, framed to flatter, designed to let him expand. He leaned into the narrative he'd polished over years, the version that placed him at the center of every win. The camera drank it in, steady and patient. What he mistook for support was actually space, enough rope for confidence to stretch, enough silence for arrogance to breathe, enough time for truth to wait. Outside the studio, Lekki traffic crawled under the afternoon sun, horns layering into a restless soundtrack. Inside, the world narrowed to a chair, a lens, and the feeling of being chosen. He basked in it, mistaking calm for control. The interview felt like a victory lap, a chance to freeze his image in high definition. He didn't notice how the questions subtly shifted, despite how the framing widened, how the lens lingered longer than necessary. Exposure doesn't arrive loudly, it arrives politely, smiling, asking you to continue. Screens in the control room mirrored his face from multiple angles, each reflection slightly different, none forgiving. Editors marked timestamps quietly, fingers hovering, ready. The broadcast signal went live, invisible but absolute, spilling into living rooms, offices, and phones across cities he would never visit. Permanence settled in. Every blink mattered now, every pause counted. He still believed the moment belonged to him, unaware that once the camera turns on, ownership changes hands and stories begin choosing their own direction. The studio's silence thickened between segments, a pause heavy enough to notice if you knew what to listen for. He filled it easily, comfort mistaking itself for charm. The room stayed neutral, impartial, almost kind. That neutrality was the tell. No one interrupted, no one corrected. The camera kept rolling. It was giving him exactly what he wanted, attention without resistance. And attention, when uninterrupted, becomes a mirror that shows you more than you intended to reveal. As the red light stayed steady, something subtle shifted beneath the polished surface. The interview was no longer about celebration, it was about alignment. Facts waiting for their moment, context assembling quietly. He felt nothing yet, only the ease of someone convinced the ground beneath him was solid. What he didn't realize was that the floor had already been marked, the angle already chosen, and the next question, still unasked, was about to change what this camera meant forever. A casual laugh escaped him as the next segment rolled in, the kind that comes from comfort, not humor. He shifted in his chair, loosened his shoulders, and let confidence spill where caution should have lived. The studio felt lighter now, like a place where honesty was rewarded. The camera held steady, capturing every relaxed gesture, every careless expression. He leaned forward slightly, enjoying the sound of his own certainty. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, a million screens leaned in with him, waiting to be entertained by whatever came next. The words arrived easily, shaped by old resentments he'd never bothered to bury. He spoke of the past like it was a joke that had aged well, framing struggle as incompetence, absence as failure. Each sentence landed smoothly, polished by years of telling the story his way. The crew remained quiet, professional, letting him continue. Silence encouraged boldness. Boldness invited cruelty. And with each remark he felt lighter, unaware he was shedding protection with every laugh that echoed too long. Phones buzzed across Lagos and far beyond, notifications lighting up faces in traffic, bedrooms and break rooms. Clips traveled fast, trimmed into bite-sized moments that rewarded shock. The audience reacted in waves, amusement first, then curiosity. Laughter turned into shares. Shares became commentary. His confidence translated well on screen, and for a moment, it worked. He looked powerful, untouchable. That illusion fed him, pushing him further, making him forget that live moments don't come with an undo button. The studio's controlled calm made everything feel safe, even when the content wasn't. He mistook professionalism for approval, mistook restraint for agreement. The lens captured his smirk, the slight shake of his head, the ease with which he dismissed a chapter of someone else's life. Outside the frame, context gathered patiently. Inside it, he performed. The difference mattered. Performance thrives on applause, but truth thrives on record, and the record was building quietly, second by second. Online, reactions began to split. Some viewers laughed along, comforted by the familiar sound of someone punching down. Others paused, sensing something off in the rhythm of his jokes. The comments section warmed up, then overheated. A mix of defense and discomfort colliding in real time. The mockery, once contained to a studio chair, now lived everywhere, detached from tone, stripped of nuance. What felt fleeting to him was becoming permanent for everyone else. Back in the studio, he kept going, unaware of the shift beyond the walls. The air conditioning hummed, lights stayed warm, and nothing interrupted his flow. That was the danger. No alarm sounded, no warning flashed. The moment stretched, inviting more, rewarding less restraint. He believed he was controlling the narrative, steering the conversation with charm and confidence. He didn't realize the narrative had already left him, traveling freely, gathering meaning he could no longer shape. By the time the segment neared its end, the damage was complete but invisible to him. The mockery had done its work. Not as an attack, but as a confession. Every word now belonged to the audience, to the archive, to the truth waiting backstage. He still smiled, still relaxed, still certain he'd just delivered a winning performance. What he couldn't see was that the laughter had changed sides, and the next moment would decide who it was really laughing at. Rain tapped softly against a window in a modest apartment tucked behind Lekki's busier roads, the kind of place no camera ever visited. Inside, she sat at a small table, papers spread neatly, laptop humming with quiet purpose. The room smelled of coffee and determination, a sharp contrast to the noise that once defined her life. While his voice echoed in a studio, hers stayed unheard, focused. This was the world he never imagined, calm, controlled, and steadily moving forward without him noticing. Her days followed a rhythm built from necessity, not comfort. Early mornings began with learning, screens glowing before sunrise, notes scribbled with urgency. Rejection emails arrived often, each one read, processed, then filed away without drama. Failure didn't announce itself loudly here. It came quietly and left quietly, making room for the next attempt. The absence of applause became normal. Progress measured itself in skills gained, not opinions earned, and that difference shaped her in ways he would never understand. She rebuilt without announcing it, step by careful step, choosing discipline over visibility. Mentors appeared slowly, drawn not by her past, but by her consistency. Opportunities followed preparation, not pity. When doors stayed closed, she learned to build windows. The city moved around her, unaware of the foundation being laid behind unremarkable walls. Lekki's skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of what was possible, not what was owed. And with every quiet win, her confidence grew deeper, not louder. Loneliness visited often, especially at night when the city finally rested. Memories surfaced then, uninvited, carrying the weight of what was lost. She let them pass without argument, understanding that grief doesn't disappear, it transforms. The marriage that ended didn't define her future, it sharpened her boundaries. Where she once waited for approval, she now trusted her own progress. Healing wasn't dramatic, it was practical, built into routines that refused to let her fall apart. While he spoke publicly about success, she practiced it privately. Savings accumulated slowly, then steadily. Projects launched without fanfare, tested, adjusted, improved. Each decision was deliberate, informed by mistakes no one bothered to document. She learned the value of patience, how silence can be strategic, how staying unseen can protect momentum. The world that once dismissed her had no idea it was financing its own surprise, one overlooked step at a time. No headlines followed her journey, no viral clips celebrated her milestones. That invisibility became an advantage. Expectations stayed low, pressure stayed manageable, and focus stayed sharp. She watched from a distance as narratives formed without her input, letting them drift. There was power in being underestimated, in knowing the truth without needing to correct anyone. What mattered was readiness, not recognition, and readiness was something she was quietly mastering. By the time his mockery reached her screen, she didn't flinch. She closed the app, returned to her work, and checked a calendar marked with dates that meant more than any insult. The woman he thought he left behind no longer existed. In her place stood someone prepared for timing, aligned with purpose, and closer to the moment that would reveal everything he never knew he was missing. Sunlight spilled through the narrow windows of her Lekki apartment, painting streaks across worn notebooks and stacks of receipts. Each page told a story of silent perseverance, lessons learned from failure, small victories celebrated alone. While the world assumed she had crumbled, she had been building a life, brick by brick. No cameras, no applause, just the sound of her own heartbeat matching the rhythm of ambition. The city roared outside, but inside, time itself seemed to bend to her patience, shaping her into someone the world would soon be forced to acknowledge. Nights stretched long and quiet, punctuated only by the hum of a laptop and the clatter of a pen against paper. Rejection became routine, not defeat. Calls went unanswered, deals fell through, and opportunities vanished, yet each setback carved wisdom into her determination. She mapped strategies while others partied, learning that discipline outlasts charisma. Sweat and focus replaced social validation. Every moment alone, every discarded plan, every failure slowly stacked into invisible armor, preparing her for a future no one had imagined she could reach. Her mornings began before dawn, the city still yawning beneath streetlights, Lagos slowly stirring. She studied markets, analyzed trends, and made contacts quietly. Without spectacle, mentors appeared only to those persistent enough to endure the invisible grind. Each day she woke, calculated her steps with precision, and layered skills atop skills until competence became second nature. While the man she once knew laughed on screens, she honed her craft in silence, a predator disguised in the calm of unnoticed effort. Friends faded, curious family stopped asking, and the world moved on without checking. Loneliness settled in like a familiar coat, uncomfortable but protective. It reminded her that resilience thrives where attention doesn't reach. Emotional pain had to be managed as quietly as financial instability, and she became adept at compartmentalizing, at focusing on the next step rather than the weight of the last. Her story was no longer about survival, it was about construction. and the foundation was rock solid. Every small win reinforced her belief that preparation speaks louder than ridicule. A project completed without notice, a deal closed quietly, an idea executed flawlessly. Each was proof that life doesn't reward the loud, only the consistent. Lekki's skyline no longer symbolized wealth for others. It became a map of possibility. And as the years passed, she moved closer to the moment when her hard work would meet public recognition, a collision that would catch everyone by surprise, especially the one who thought her story ended long ago. She learned to measure success in unseen ways: a growing bank account, skills sharpened, a reputation built behind doors. Her rise was invisible, not by choice but by necessity. People's whispers, social judgments, and early assumptions became irrelevant. Its discipline replaced distraction, patience replaced despair. And the quiet power of being underestimated, of letting people believe you failed, became her most effective weapon. Every unnoticed hour had a purpose, every ignored moment a seed of future inevitability. By the time the camera captured his arrogance, she was already a force fully formed. The years no one was watching had created someone who didn't flinch at ridicule, who could turn scorn into fuel, who had learned the hardest truth. Success earned in silence arrives sharper than any public applause. And as she prepared for the world to finally see, she knew the greatest satisfaction would come not from revenge, but from the undeniable unveiling of everything he thought he had destroyed. The studio lights flickered subtly as the host's voice cut through the hum of cameras. Everything seemed normal, professional, polished, but the air shifted. A single question, calm and deliberate, sliced the atmosphere like a knife. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it carried weight. The man's confident posture faltered just slightly. Eyes widened. He forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. The audience leaned forward, sensing the pivot. Something was coming, something unexpected. And in that quiet tension, he realized, without fully understanding, that this was no ordinary interview. The host repeated the question, each word deliberate, drawing out the tension like slow lightning. The man's mind raced. He knew he had prepared for accolades, for applause, for a narrative that painted him as the winner. But nothing in his rehearsed responses fit this moment. The camera didn't just record, it waited. Every microphone, as every lens became a mirror. The audience could feel his confusion, his unsteady breath, the way his fingers tapped almost imperceptibly on the armrest. Confidence was slipping, and he didn't know why. Off camera, the woman he mocked sat in silent composure, framed perfectly within the shot. She didn't move, didn't speak, yet presence alone shifted the room. The energy in the studio subtly recalibrated around her. The question, directed at him, was meant to illuminate, to reveal, to contrast arrogance with reality. As the host continued, the man's laughter of moments ago now felt like a distant echo. His ego, once untouchable, wavered under invisible weight. And though he couldn't see it, the audience's focus had begun to drift, not to him, but to what he had overlooked. The room's tension grew, palpable and uneven. Every crew member, every assistant, every light operator seemed suddenly aligned with the gravity of the moment. Sweat beaded on his forehead, the slight quiver in his hand betraying his poise. He forced a smile, tried to pivot, to control the narrative, but the question had already planted doubt, a seed of exposure that would bloom disastrously. The host's calm tone amplified the contrast between his panic and the quiet mastery of the woman waiting patiently for recognition. His eyes flicked briefly to her, and for the first time he saw something he hadn't expected. A quiet confidence. Not smugness, not vengeance, but clarity. She didn't need to speak yet. Her story was already rewriting the narrative in real time. The audience sensed it too, their curiosity piqued by this silent power. The question had done its job. It had shifted attention, but reversed perspective, and initiated a psychological trap that the man could not escape, no matter how hard he tried to maintain control. The host paused, letting silence stretch like a taut wire across the studio. Every second amplified the man's discomfort. His rehearsed arrogance collided with reality, creating micro moments of panic he couldn't mask. Viewers online began sensing it instantly: the tension, the anticipation, the subtle unfolding of what would come. Clips of his earlier laughter suddenly appeared ironic, foreshadowing the undoing he was now powerless to stop. And in that pregnant pause, the air itself seemed to whisper, "The story is not yours to tell." When he finally opened his mouth to respond, words stumbled like fragile glass cracking under pressure. The audience leaned in, captivated, sensing the shift from performance to reckoning. The room, the lights, the cameras, they all seemed complicit, pressing in. And somewhere in the back of his mind, the first true understanding emerged. The interview was never about him. Everything he thought was under control had already been circumscribed by the silent, invisible preparation of someone he once dismissed. A reckoning had begun, and it was far beyond his ability to negotiate. The host's voice carried a calm authority as the spotlight shifted ever so slightly, drawing the focus away from him. The camera lingered, steady and unblinking, as the woman he mocked was finally named. Achievements rolled out like a quiet storm. Businesses launched, communities impacted, recognition earned. Every accolade was factual, verifiable, undeniable. Numbers, awards, and real-life proof eclipsed the arrogance he had worn like armor. The room seemed to shrink around him, compressing every ounce of his pride into a single, fragile point. And as the audience absorbed the truth, laughter from moments ago turned hollow, almost absurd. A subtle wave of murmurs spread through the studio. The energy shifted from curiosity to awe. Viewers leaned closer, cameras catching every micro-expression, every twitch of disbelief. His face betrayed confusion, a thin veneer of composure cracking with each fact revealed. The silence of her patience was louder than his mockery had ever been. Its social media notifications pinged relentlessly in real time. Clips, hashtags, reactions, all spreading her story like wildfire. The man realized, too late, that the narrative he had tried to dominate had been claimed without confrontation, without spectacle, and entirely on her terms. The contrast between past and present pressed against him. He remembered the contemptuous smiles, the casual jokes at her expense, the way he had dismissed her as nothing. And now, as achievements and impact were presented, every word he once spoke echoed back as irony. The audience felt it, the shift in balance palpable. The woman's calm, composed posture told a story no words could exaggerate. Resilience, intelligence, and silent determination had built what he had scorned. His laughter had become a soundtrack to his own humiliation, and there was no way to press rewind. The lights reflected off glossy surfaces, studio monitors showing social media reactions in real time. Comments celebrated her victory, tagged her achievements, highlighted his arrogance. Even off-air staff whispered, caught in the spectacle of quiet triumph over public derision. The man's mind raced. How had he underestimated her? How had he failed to see the years of unseen effort that transformed poverty into prosperity? Each revelation was precise, targeted, and surgical, dismantling his narrative piece by piece. The room itself seemed to side with her, every lens, every angle framing him shrinking while she stood centered. He tried to speak, to interject, but words faltered, empty against the evidence of success. The audience felt his panic before they saw it fully. Ice sensing the collapse of control without the need for dramatics. She didn't celebrate. She didn't gloat. Her quiet power needed no amplification. The truth spoke for itself, relentless and undeniable. And as her story unfolded, a tension like a tightening rope coiled around his chest. He realized viscerally that the victory he had once assumed was forever his had already been rewritten by someone he had deemed insignificant. The air seemed heavier with each passing fact, each named achievement. Viewers online reacted with awe, inspiration, and validation of what they had suspected. Resilience wins where arrogance fails. Every metric, every accolade, every acknowledgement erased the false narrative he had tried to construct. The woman had not only survived judgment and mockery, but had turned it into a foundation of undeniable success. And now, with the audience witnessing in real time, the power of preparation over performance crystallized, a lesson he could neither dispute nor escape. By the final name dropped, by the final impact highlighted, the room had shifted entirely. The camera captured the transformation, the narrative reversal, the poetic justice that had silently built for years. The man sat frozen, a shadow of the confidence he had flaunted, realizing that the story of his ex-wife's life was not only her own, but now public property, a narrative he had no ability to control. And as the applause, online engagement, and sheer validation of her success washed over the room, he knew one immutable truth. He had laughed at the wrong person, at the wrong life, at the wrong story, and the reckoning had arrived. A sudden stillness fell over the studio, as if the air itself had paused to witness him unravel. His lips, once curled in arrogance, stiffened mid-smile, caught between disbelief and fear. Every camera angle froze his expression, capturing the first cracks in his carefully constructed image. The laughter that had once echoed confidently now seemed absurd, hollow, almost grotesque. His eyes darted around, seeking support, validation, any lifeline, but found only the cold glare of truth reflected in studio monitors and the audience's expectant faces. The realization hit like a thunderclap. His superiority had been an illusion. A chill slid down his spine as murmurs filled the room, a symphony of awareness and surprise. The energy shifted from mere curiosity to intense scrutiny. Every person watching, the live audience, social media viewers, even studio staff, felt the weight of his moment of collapse. His posture betrayed tension, shoulders stiff, hands gripping the chair as though it could anchor him against the storm of exposure. Pride had no shield here. Every blink, every involuntary movement documented his defeat long before any words could articulate it. His mind raced, piecing together the silent sabotage he hadn't seen. The woman he had mocked, the one he had dismissed as insignificant, had orchestrated her rise quietly, invisibly, and now it all confronted him in sharp, undeniable clarity. The accolades, the statistics, the recognition, they weren't just facts. They were a mirror, reflecting the arrogance of years spent belittling someone who had quietly mastered every obstacle he had thought trivial. And in that reflection, he saw the truth. He had underestimated patience, discipline, and silent preparation. Sweat prickled his temples as he realized the cameras weren't just recording him. They were broadcasting his unraveling to millions. The audience's focus had shifted. The center of attention was no longer his charm or wit, but the undeniable reality of her success. He had always controlled narratives, sculpted perception, and now he was trapped in one he did not control. Every instinct screamed to recover, to speak, to justify, but words felt heavy, inadequate, and dangerous. Silence became his only companion, though it offered no protection. The room's acoustics amplified his internal panic. Every subtle sound, the click of cameras, the shuffling of notes, the quiet gasps, echoing louder than any applause. He tried to smile again, a reflex of habit, but the expression faltered halfway, breaking against the truth displayed for all to see. His eyes flickered toward the host, the woman, the monitors, searching desperately for a lifeline, a hint of mercy, a distraction. But there was none. Every lens was pointed, every viewer engaged, every detail recorded, permanent and unforgiving. Time seemed to stretch, each second magnifying his exposure. The arrogance that had once carried him like armor now felt like lead pressing down on every nerve. He remembered the casual cruelty, the jokes at her expense, the certainty of his own superiority. And now, each memory became a sharpened edge, cutting deeper into the pride he had relied upon. Humiliation was no longer hypothetical, it was cinematic, visceral, unavoidable. His empire of perception had collapsed in an instant, replaced by the undeniable force of her achievement. And then, in the briefest moment of clarity, he understood. He could neither laugh, argue, nor erase what had been revealed. The freeze in his smile wasn't just a fleeting expression, it was the emotional punctuation of defeat, an unspoken acknowledgement that control, arrogance, and mockery had been rendered powerless. The audience, live and online, felt it, shared it, and amplified it. And as he sat there, a man stripped of performance, the truth settled in every fiber of the room. The silent rise of the woman he mocked was complete, and he had become an unwilling witness to his own undoing. The studio cameras no longer captured just a man. They captured a crumbling image, a facade cracking in real time. Social media had already erupted, notifications and alerts buzzing like a swarm of insects around him. Clips of his mocking laughter, a once fleeting, were now viral evidence, replayed endlessly with captions that pierced every corner of the internet. Every like, every share, every comment magnified his humiliation. What he had treated as entertainment had become ammunition, a live demonstration of arrogance turned public downfall. Reputation, once wielded like a weapon, now felt fragile, exposed, and utterly unprotected. Every familiar face in the room seemed to blur into judgment. Colleagues who had nodded at his charm now shifted uneasily, some whispering, others shaking their heads. Even the host, once a neutral orchestrator, leaned forward with a subtle look of realization. The tables had turned. The cameras, the lights, the studio itself had become instruments of his undoing. Each frame captured micro-expressions that betrayed panic, fear, and disbelief. His words, a once powerful and controlled, were now his greatest liability, immortalized for the world to dissect and dissect again. Outside the studio, Lagos woke to the scandal. Clips circulated instantly across feeds, WhatsApp groups, and Twitter threads. Commentary ranged from shock to amusement, but beneath it all lay a clear narrative. The man who had mocked success now confronted it. His face, his arrogance, his laughter, every detail of his past cruelty was now public property. People who had once admired him whispered differently. Friends questioned loyalties, and strangers gleefully watched the unraveling of a figure who had believed himself untouchable. Influence could be won, but it could be shattered in a heartbeat. The irony was palpable. The very tools he had relied on to maintain dominance, media attention, camera angles, live broadcasts, were now instruments of destruction. Every clip, every frame, every snippet was replayed without his control. The more he tried to smooth the edges, to regain composure, the more evident the cracks became. His carefully constructed narrative, years of self-promotion, subtle manipulation, and selective storytelling, was stripped away in an instant, leaving only a man staring helplessly at the power of truth. His internal panic grew with every notification, every buzzing phone, every comment ping. The social media storm mirrored the reality in the studio. Eyes everywhere, judgment everywhere, consequences everywhere. What had started as private arrogance had become a public spectacle. He understood finally that reputation is not an asset to guard lightly. It is fragile, conditional, and dependent on perception. And once perception flips, it feeds on itself, accelerating collapse until recovery seems impossible. Meanwhile, she remained calm. Her presence in the background, her achievements articulated and undeniable, contrasted sharply with his floundering. She didn't need to speak, defend, or celebrate. The world had already taken note. The narrative had shifted, permanently, from him to her. Every second he hesitated, every flinch, every attempt to rationalize his past mockery reinforced the story the public now embraced. Arrogance has consequences, silence and preparation have power, and the underestimated always rise. By the end of the broadcast, the transformation was complete. His once commanding image was fractured beyond repair. Headlines were no longer about his charm, but about his exposure. Clips of laughter at her expense became the proof of his folly, replayed with ironic delight. In Lagos, online platforms, and every public space, his undoing was a lesson and a spectacle. And as he sat there, caught between disbelief and shame, the truth was undeniable. The man who once mocked had lost not just face, but authority, credibility, and control, while the woman he underestimated stood victorious, silent, but untouchable. She walked into her office in Lekki, sunlight spilling across the glass floors, and for a moment, the city felt still. The world outside buzzed with the remnants of his humiliation, but inside, there was calm, quiet control. Her success wasn't loud, it wasn't performative, it was measured, earned, and undeniable. Every project completed, every deal secured, and every late night of planning and sacrifice built a fortress that no mockery could ever breach. She didn't need validation. Her victories were silent testimonies of resilience, and the universe had delivered the final proof that preparation always outlasts arrogance. The man, meanwhile, sat alone in the aftermath, scrolling through feeds, replaying the live footage. His laughter had vanished, replaced by a weight pressing into his chest, unfamiliar and unwelcome. Every word he had thrown casually, every insult aimed at her poverty, now circled endlessly in the public eye. The same confidence that once carried him through boardrooms and interviews now faltered, revealing fragility beneath the surface. He realized, painfully, that power is not volume, and status is not permanence. Both can be erased by a story told louder, truer, and without apology. Lekki's skyline stretched beyond her window, glinting under the late afternoon sun, reflecting a life rebuilt from the ashes of judgment. Her team worked quietly, unaware of the storm her ex-husband had become, focused on expansion and innovation. This section contrasts chaos and calm, his panic versus her composure, public collapse versus private mastery. The city itself became a silent witness to the moral of the story. Success, she knew, was never about proving others wrong. It was about proving to yourself that persistence and integrity carry weight no ridicule can diminish. Even the media began to shift narratives. Headlines that had once celebrated his charm now highlighted her rise, her achievements, her discipline. Clips that had fueled mockery now underscored poetic justice. The truth, once hidden, dominated conversations across Lagos and beyond. He had thought he controlled the story, but the story always belonged to the prepared, the silent, and the persistent. His downfall became a lesson etched in the minds of everyone who watched. Arrogance invites exposure, patience commands respect, and life always favors those who build quietly while others laugh. She didn't need to speak. Her emails, her contracts, her influence whispered authority louder than any broadcast. The city could see it in her buildings, her meetings, her calculated steps through boardrooms that had once seemed inaccessible. The lesson was universal. Power isn't about being louder than everyone else. It's about being steady when the world doubts you, strategic when others mock you, and unwavering when silence is all you have. Every observer could feel it. Real influence moves unseen, unshakable, unstoppable. Back in his apartment, the realization sank deeper. Every social media clip, every comment, every conversation about his undoing hammered the lesson home. Control is an illusion. Reputation is fragile. Words once used as weapons can rebound with greater force. And the woman he dismissed? She had transcended his frame entirely, untouchable, respected, and above the petty judgments he once believed defined her. There was no confrontation, No revenge needed. Her victory was complete because it didn't demand recognition, only reflection. As Lagos transitioned from dusk to night, the city lights mirrored the moral arc of the story. Brilliance earned quietly shines brighter than arrogance displayed publicly. Power, when rooted in patience and resilience, does not scream, it endures. Silence is not weakness, preparation is not vanity, and life always remembers those who act with integrity. He had mocked poverty and underestimated patience, but she had built kingdoms in quiet. In the end, the world learned the truth. Respect is earned, arrogance is exposed, and real victory needs no audience.